September 1st, 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report. His one good eye, the other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanned words that made him laugh out loud in the humid operations tent. The Americans had produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero. Another American failure of design. Through the tent flaps he could see his squadrons, a 6M Zero lined up on the pierced steel planking, sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-42s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes. All had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1. It would destroy 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant a statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service, IJNAS, had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm, annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force, eliminated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi a 6M an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught. It seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through a revolutionary design philosophy. Extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce was sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 lbs loaded. The Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square ft with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition. Armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seemed to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 lbs per square ft gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 lbs per square ft suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse, September 30th, 1943, Marcus Island, Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he saw the distinctive silhouette, single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter. Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. Engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6th position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, over 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai, 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward per minute. It struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer 2nd Class Masao, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat, the weight paradox, October 5, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept. We climbed to 20,000 feet. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 lbs of plate protecting the pilot, 110 lbs around the oil system, and self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows. Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. They fight like executioners. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanimizu briefed them. Tanimizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. Forget everything you know about air combat. The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors. Tanimizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintain speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. They work in pairs, one high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine, the gulf of technology and pilots. December 1943, Truk Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer. His inspection of damaged Zeros revealed the growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was mathematical. Hell 1,500 rounds per minute total. 7.7 millimeters, 750 feet lbs of energy per round. More disturbing were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark. By January 1944, the Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. Pre-war Japanese pilot, 3 years training, 700+ flight hours. Early 1944 Japanese pilot, 200 to 300 flight hours. American pilot, 300+ hours minimum, 50 hours in type. Fuel shortages meant most Japanese training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, a training officer, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. We have no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night. He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle that would destroy American carrier power. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. Against them, Task Force 58, with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 8:30. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw them minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet. At least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. The Zeros tried to turn with us. We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses, 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Formosa Revelation Bar. October 12th to 16th, 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome committed over 700 aircraft to stop the American carrier raids. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality, discovered only after pilots returned, was catastrophic. Actual American losses, 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, 329 aircraft and almost every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids. It was not combat. It was systematic extermination. The Leyte Gulf Record. October 24, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from the Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros, 4 bombers, while his wingman destroyed 6 more ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. His engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. Collapse and kamikaze. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots were engaging not planes, but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for kamikaze pilots. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of the Hellcat's superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near 0. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission. Claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport plane. Shot down by Hellcats. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The final test was Okinawa. From April to June 1945, the Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties. The Hellcat became the fleet's iron shield. They flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.51 ratio. They prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The final testimony. By 1945, the technological gap was unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat now had water injection, boosting power to 2,200 horsepowers, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. I performed my best aerobatics, loops, rolls, splits. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, achieved a 19.3-to-1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. On August 15, 1945, Enan Clarence Moore, flying a Hellcat, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, the last aerial victory of World War II. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. After the surrender, Japanese engineers studied the Hellcat. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, concluded, We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. Grumman's production of the Hellcat was itself a weapon. At its peak, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. Grumman produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. We brought swords to a gunfight. The Hellcat revolutionized naval warfare. Admiral Mark Mitchell, commander of Task Force 58, understood. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This confidence allowed American carriers to park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable. In 1962, American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict. Captain David Mack Campbell, the Navy's ace of aces, stated simply, "Bruh, the Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "Bruh, the Zero was a superior fighter, the Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, provided the most honest assessment. "We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist." Saburo Sakai lived until 2000. In his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, and their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros. It had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.